Good afternoon and welcome to the Palo Alto Historical Association meeting. This will be as a kind of an unusual event here. We're celebrating, yes, like 75 years since the Japanese internment. Dick Mansfield and Yukio Shimomura, are going to give a presentation, and Dick will start the program. He's been a docent at Manzanar for some years and is intimately involved in the program, and so he'll start the program now. He's been a resident here for many years in Palo Alto, so he's part of our community. Dick?
Hi, I am Dick Mansfield. Am I loud enough for you, Brian? Okay. We're here today to talk about events that occurred beginning 75 years ago. And you say, okay, let's talk relevance. For relevance, I give you a well-known saying, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. That's words to think about as we go through today's program. Yukio Shimomura, who's sitting here in the front row, as a young man served in the U.S. Army. He then went to college in Utah, received an engineering degree, worked as both an engineer and a human relations specialist at Hewlett-Packard and as a consultant for other companies as well. Yukio and I are about the same age, and we're both American citizens by birth. Now, on the day of Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941, we were both in grammar schools or elementary schools in Pacific Coast cities, he in San Francisco and I in Seattle. There are probably a number of other similarities and several differences, but one of the differences became very relevant right after Pearl Harbor. Yukio is of Japanese-American ancestry. I am not. So in the spring of 1942, Yukio and his family and more than 110,000 other people of Japanese descent were shipped from the Pacific Coast into camps called war relocation centers. Some other people called them concentration camps, and many of them spent the rest of the war years there. Now, I wasn't relocated. We had a couple of young Japanese friends who worked in our household named Chisco and Sumi. I still remember warmly. And shortly after Pearl Harbor, they vanished from our lives. And my brother and I were 7 and 5 at the time. And we wondered what had become of Chisco and Sumi, and our parents told us. And that seemed an awful thing to have happened to Chisco and Sumi, but it happened to an awful lot of people. Yukio lived the relocation. So let's hear his story to start. Yukio Shimomura.
Thank you, Dick. This is a great turnout, and I really appreciate coming out in the inclement weather. My mother and dad ran out of biblical names. They were baptized in Japan, and by the time they got to me, they ran out of English names, and so they named me Yukio. And for the longest time when I was growing up, I wish my name was like Tom, and my last name would have been Jones. It would have been so much easier because when I was in the service, they'd get to my name in the alphabetical order, and I knew who they were stuck on, and they took about a half a second, and then I just said, I'm here. And so, anyway, the picture that you see here is my dad is on the left, my oldest brother, my mother, and the 4 sisters there, all my cousins, my auntie and my grandmother, my uncle, and sitting there without a beard is the smallest guy up there, and then my other brother. My aunt and uncle sponsored us to come to the United States, and that was back in the mid-20s. Right after the earthquake in Japan, the economy in Japan was so bad that they needed to get some kind of relief, and that's why they were able to come. Now, the background picture is a picture of the barracks. The barrack that you see here is tar paper and And then underneath the tar paper was 1x8s or 1x12s. And that's the only protection that we had to the outside world. So anyway, how could this happen, and what have we learned? And I'm going to try to go over my family's experience so that then you get a feel for what's going on, or what happened, and what could happen to some people if we continue in the trek that we're on right now. Now, I just want to find out who's here today, so I'm going to quickly go through these slides. Under 25. All right, the student from Palo High, is that right? Thank you for coming. 25 to 60. Oh, a lot of young people here today. Over 60. All right. How about 70? Oh my goodness. 80. Oh, wow. 90. All right, we got one. Welcome to the club. Born overseas? Okay. Europe? Asia? Asia. Interesting. Middle East? Okay. Europe? Africa? No? How many of you are parents? All right. Grandparents? Okay. Do we have veterans in this room? Way to go. Thank you very much, guys. Women, too. I was criticized about not asking whether there were any mothers of veterans in this room. Do we have any mothers of veterans? Oh, my goodness. Okay. Anybody in the service today? Have you heard these words before? Executive Order 9066. It seems like the executive orders are coming out in droves right now based on the new president that we have. Incarceration versus relocation. Tanforan. How many of you remember Tanforan as a racetrack? Oh, you guys are local. Delta, Utah. Anybody from Utah here? Okay, we got one. Topaz. Okay. Tule Lake. Hey, I might as well stop right now. You guys have more history than I do. 442nd. 101st. Okay, we started out with our family in San Francisco. Here's my mom and dad picture when they got married in the 1920s. In those days, they didn't, I don't know why, but the men don't smile when they take pictures. Maybe he knew what he was getting into, I don't know. Here's a picture of mom and dad, my grandmother and myself, and then my two brothers. 1872 Bush Street in San Francisco. That's where we were living, okay? That's me on the left. That's one of the original flower childs of San Francisco. Now, things were really peaceful in San Francisco in those days. I used to ride the scooter up and down the street on Bush Street, and my two brothers were in the Boy Scouts. My mother and dad were going to Christian church, and my mother was a soloist and a pianist and part of the choir. And then the big shock came when I was 6 years old, and this is a day that everybody remembers, your parents and your grandparents especially. The war started on December 7th. Now here's a statement that I'd like to read because it's so crazy. A Jap is a Jap. It makes no difference whether he is an American citizen or not. He is still a Japanese. The Japanese race is an enemy race, and while many have become Americanized, the racial strains are undiluted. Sabotage and espionage will make problems as long as he's allowed in the area. The very fact that no sabotage has taken place to date is a disturbing and confirming indication that such action will be taken. Now, you guys are smiling and laughing, but this is really what was put out. The general that wrote this statement, General DeWitt, told a lot of people that there would be an uprising and there would be 20,000 Japanese that would do the uprising. J. Edgar Hoover said that's not going to happen. So the whole thing about getting the Japs out of the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, and California, there was a lot of legislators in California that didn't want the Japanese to stay in California. There was a big argument because part of it was from an economic point of view that the Japanese farmers were doing so well that the American farmers didn't want them, and so then they said, let's kick them out. Back in Washington, the Attorney General had some very heated or big discussions between he and the presidential group and administration. And what was emphasized was the fact that American citizens were going to be incarcerated, and that's not right according to the way the Attorney General was speaking. But there was such fear-mongering that it happened. So this is where you think about today and all of the fear-mongering that's going on, all of the propaganda that's going on, and you have to wonder what the hell is going on. This is the document that was developed. This document, I'll read parts of it to you in a minute, but during that time that there was a big discussion between the anniversary date, the 75th anniversary of Executive Order 9066, and the time that this document was produced, they had made the barracks and everything else to incarcerate the people. It says, all persons of Japanese, both alien and non-alien. The thing you gotta think about is non-alien, okay? Evacuated by 12 o'clock on May the 11th. Now, everybody in this room was told that at the end of March, you would have to leave your home. Can you imagine what you'd have to go through? No Japanese in the area would be able to change their residence without permission. So you're starting to feel the feeling of, whoa, I'm being told what to do. How many people like to be told what to do? And so when they say they're going to provide services for the sale, leasing, real estate, business, professional equipment, household goods, boats, and okay, let's say that you have a business. You have inventory. You have all of the cases in which your inventory is put in. What are you going to do with all of that? You think somebody's going to come along and say, I will give you the going rate of those. The going rate was pennies on the dollar, okay? A lot of people lost a lot of money, a lot of people lost a lot of property. And if you're a farmer, and this document was put out in May, your crops are already in seed, planted, and getting ready to harvest in June or July. So what are you going to do with that? You report to the civil service. Our family number was 14992. Why is this number embedded in my head? It just comes back. After you turn 80, things pop in. After you turn 80, things pop out real quick too. So now here's the interesting part. You must carry on departure bedding, linen, toilet articles, extra clothing, sufficient knives, forks, spoons, bowls, cups, and essential personal effects. Now, how much do you take with you? Do you say you're gonna go for a week? Like when you plan for a vacation for a week or maybe two, you sort of know how much to take, but when you're told you're gonna go, but there's no end date that you're given, what would your feelings be? How many of you have pets? Okay, well, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to leave them. You're gonna have to leave them at the SPCA or with your friends. So if you have big items like a washing machine, refrigerator, well, not refrigerator, but ice boxes, and other heavy furniture, how many of you own pianos? Okay, well, I'm sorry, if you can't carry that on your back, you can't take it with you, okay? And you have china, you have nice silver set, and you have china set. Then you have the dining table, all the chairs that go. If you can't carry that on your back, you can't take it with you. So are you taking it? Hell no. So the question is, what is really going on? You're in a situation where you must obey orders, not to openly complain. And in the Japanese tradition, in a cultural basis, you don't embarrass your fellow person. So the Japanese word is shikataganai, so be it, this is the way it is. The other Japanese word that's very popular in those days was gaman. Gaman means be stoic. And the last one is no monku, which is very familiar in the Japanese language, which means no bitching. Now, there were 127,000 Japanese people in the United States at that time. On the West Coast, there was 110,000. Isseis were 40,000. Issei meaning born in Japan, they're the first generation. So the Niseis, like myself, there were 70,000. And then there's the Kibe young people that were sent, they were born in the United States, they were sent to Japan, and then they were able to come back after they got educated. Of course, some never made it back because they got hung up while the war was going on. And then, for some reason, there's 1/16th blood, okay. Here's a situation that I'd like to share with you is, what if I happen to be dating a Caucasian woman? And I was 19, 20 years old. And it got pretty hot, and therefore then we said, you know what, we ought to get married, okay? And he said, and then a little time goes by and then a baby's born. So now you have a situation where you have an interracial marriage and you have a child. Does the Caucasian woman go to the camp with the child? Or does the Caucasian woman stay out of the camp with the child? Now, if the child is born, the born child has blonde hair and blue eyes, do you think there'll be any harassment or discrimination inside the camp with all the black-haired people and brown-eyed people in the camp? You got to believe that. And then if you were outside of the camp and the woman, the Caucasian woman, had a black-haired, brown-eyed child, do you think there's any harassment by the community at that point in time? Yes. This woman tried to stay in the camp, but she couldn't handle the harassment, therefore she and the child left the camp. Here we are lined up, and you could see that everybody's dressed, necktie, hat. The women wore hats in those days. But the person in the uniform is a soldier of the United States Army. That's the sign that everybody knew was saying, we're going to camp. A Japanese American store owner says, hey, I'm an American. Doesn't matter. This is a family that owned a store in San Francisco. His last name is Tatsuno. They own a store in San Jose right now. The sign in the window says, "1 day to go." Now, again, what did he do with his inventory? What did he do with the loan to the companies that he owed money to? Where were the banks at that time? Were they lenient to say, "Oh, it's okay, you don't have to pay your debt? Give me a break"? Here's another interesting picture. If you saved up a lot of money to buy a car, and in those days, they look like jalopies right now, but those are pretty current cars up there, okay? And for those of you who are sort of mechanically inclined, there were 6-volt batteries in the car, and the rubber and tube tires, you know what happens after you leave them for about a month or so. The battery goes dead, and it doesn't start. The rubber on the tires go bad. But the interesting thing is, they don't know how long they're gonna leave their cars there. They were just told to bring the cars if you have a car, and you just park it and leave it, okay? This sign was in the Japanese community. By stamps, by bonds, by Japs. One of the things that I try to emphasize to people is that Jap is a fairly, very derogatory word in the Japanese community, as much as the N word is in the African American community. So I always tell people, if the semantics or the words that you use include the N word, please don't use it, especially in my face. Now, here's an interesting cartoon. If you look on the map, it's Washington, Oregon, California. Then you got the gentleman on the roof looking to when to get the signal to blow off the TNT that is supposed to happen. Now, the artist for this cartoon is Dr. Seuss. If you look up in the internet, and you look up Dr. Seuss, and you look up propaganda, this guy must have been a starving artist, but I think he made a lot of money making a lot of these propaganda cartoons, as well as he did it with Germans in it too. I don't read Dr. Seuss to my grandchildren anymore. There were people who resisted or defied the order. There are 3 guys that did it. Do we have any attorneys in the audience? Okay. Well, you're an attorney too. Okay. Now, what if a Japanese guy came up to you right after the war started and said, "I need some help"? Would you say, "I can't help you because you're Japanese"? Or you're up against a losing case? Here's what happened to the Japanese person that was an attorney. His punishment was 1 year in jail for resisting. Gordon Hirabayashi, student, arrested and convicted, 2 years in jail. And Fred Koromatsu, he didn't want to leave because he didn't want to leave his Italian girlfriend. Okay, figure that one out. So all of these cases went to the Supreme Court, and I'll follow up toward the end, say what's going on. Here we are, packing. Remember what I said? You can only take what you can carry. Everybody's got their hats on, and they look very nice. Again, you see a soldier up there, and this time he's got a bayonet, ushering us into the buses. Down in LA at Santa Anita Track, you have all these soldiers lined up, all these people lined up ready to go into the camp. So we're going to Tanforan. Tanforan was established in 1899. Here's the building that was first there. How many of you remember this building? Well, that's interesting. Now, if you say it started in if you say that this is 1942, there were over 40 years of racing season there. The barracks were in the infield. The grandstand is here. Now, on the other side of the grandstand was business as usual. Traffic in San Bruno was going back and forth, okay? People were inside, all barbed wired in. Now, besides the barracks, there were 50 horse stables there. So somebody said, hey, yeah, we could put them in there. It shouldn't bother them. At least they're in a safe place. So what did they do? They washed the stables out. And then they put linoleum on the floor. But the boards that they made the stables from was green boards. Green board meaning they were not kiln dried. Therefore, when they dry, they have spaces about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch between the boards. So you can imagine what it's like. If you're talking to somebody in one room, you could hear the conversation in the other room, okay? And you got to remember, in those days, they didn't have Airwick developed yet. How many gallons of Febreze would it have taken to take the odor out of the whole stables? It would have been gallons and gallons. And it's vivid to me still that you could smell the people that came out of the stables. There was only one light bulb that was electrically hooked into the bulb. Now, you got to remember, there's no sinks, there's no toilet. So you go where everybody else is going, okay? So it was very inconvenient. So here we are, all of the scrap wood that was left over from the barracks. People they were ingenious enough and provided with nails and a saw or something, and they were able to make some furniture so that they could have room to sit on besides the cot that they were given. Here's a picture of some people putting straws in a bag. How many of you have allergies of any sort? It would be tough for you to survive because the bags were used as mattresses, okay? So the lucky ones, like we were given cotton mattresses, but we all had the military cots. And then they dumped the luggage out there like that, and then we had to sort through our own stuff. So once you get into the camp, there's lines and lines and lines. There's lines for breakfast, lines for lunch, lines for dinner. That's the guard tower. They had military personnel in the guard tower with weapons and ammo in their rifles. My father-in-law had a different situation. He had a mom and pop shop in Tacoma, Washington. Born in Japan. He was drafted at the age of 18, left the army at 20. By the time the war started, he was 40 years old. He changed his last name because he married into a family that had girls only. That was a custom that some men allowed their last name to be changed so that then they could continue the legacy of the family on an ongoing basis. So I'm asking all you guys in this room, all the men in this room, how many men would give up your last name, your surname that you've had for your life, and give it up so you could take up the wife's last name? How many would do that? Well, we got some progressive guys in here. Times have changed. He taught a class in chanting, owned the store. As soon as the war started, he was arrested and jailed because he was under suspicion. They interrogated him hours and hours. Why did you change your last name? What did you do in the Japanese army? he kept coming up with the same stories. But you know, when you're interviewed or interrogated by people who don't know the culture, you're not believable. So he went to Fort Missoula. Fort Missoula is a fort up in Missoula, Montana. They had over 1,000 Italians incarcerated up there, as much as they had Japanese guys incarcerated. The Italians were incarcerated because they were on ships, Italian ships, and they were told to get off the ship, come to the camp, and then they were at some kind of World's Fair in Texas or something, so they were all shipped up there. All their ages were between 18 and 30 or so, where the men, Japanese men, were in their 40s and 50s. So he went to the other Camp Livingston, Arkansas Penitentiary in Crystal City, and then he was able to go to Tule Lake. So that's a picture that he painted in Tule Lake. That's my mother-in-law there, my sister-in-law, and that's my wife standing there in between, and my brother-in-law. So in Tanforan, we had school. We had grade school, junior high, high school, and they tried to make things business as usual. The word that was used, I just heard it before we started, is things were normalized. At least they tried. Here we are going to Topaz now, and you say, well, where's Topaz? Well, it's in Delta. Where's Delta? You know, where's Salt Lake City? You know, and in those days, geography was not that popular. Here we are being packed. We were put into the trains under armed guard. The shades were pulled. There were armed guards on both ends of the train, so that then we would not escape. Okay, can you imagine getting out of the train in the middle of Nevada? So here's a picture of Utah in red, but all of the triangles are where the other camps were. The little black dots up there were the relocation camps. Okay, that's the camps that we went to before we went to the big camp. This is a list of all of the camps. And when the month, and day, month, year started, and the population. What's the population in Palo Alto?
65,000.
55?
65.
Okay, so half of this, all of the city would go to half of the camps. What they did was in Topaz, what they did was they leveled the ground. They took a grader and graded it. They covered up all the gopher holes and all of the animals' holes. They had scorpions, lizards, and horned toads. We used to chase them. We used to chase the lizard, and then we'd catch their tail, and the tail would snap off. So that was fun. Topaz was in the middle of the state. The state was covered by water millions of years ago. It was Lake Bonneville, okay? So when they pulled the plug on the lake, it went all the way down, and next thing you know, when you drill for water, you get nothing but salt water. There's no filtering process at that time. We were drinking salt water all the time. How many of you people have been on a Navy ship that had salt water? There you go. So you know what I'm talking about. Saltwater showers and everything else like that. So how many of you drink bottled water now? Filtered water. Is Palo Alto water good for you? Yeah. All right, you're lucky. This is the welcoming committee in Topaz City. See the guy in the middle there? He's got his Levi's tucked up about 4 or 5 inches. The reason why Japanese people tucked their pants up that high was they had short legs. And so I told my daughter about this. I said, hey, look at that guy. He's got is cuffed up that high. He says, well, that's the style now. And I said, okay, I'll shut up now. So you can see the guy is still assimilating. He's got his hat and coat. This guy here has a jungle hat on. I don't know where he got it from. The camp was laid out 1 mile square with the dots along the periphery of the camp. Every dot represents a guard tower. Every guard tower had a guard in it. Every guard had a weapon. And there was one incident where a guy came close to the fence, and the guard must have said to him, "Stop or I'll shoot." I hope he repeated it several times, but when you're Japanese and you don't understand English, and the guy keeps repeating himself, and we don't know if the guy that was getting close to the fence was hard of hearing or not, well, he got shot. He got killed, and that really rattled a lot of people in the camp. The red square represents the block that we were in. We were in block 27. Our barrack number was 4, and the room number was E. The blue box there is the school that I went to. It's called Desert View. On the upper right-hand corner, you see the military police, the hospitals, and then the warehouses. The blocks were laid out. As you can see, it's A, B, C, D, E, F. We were in 27-4E. If you were in A or E, there were 3 people. E, A or F, it was 3 people. B and E, a maximum of 5 to 6 people, and C and D would be maximum of 4. If you had a bigger family than 6, then they broke the wall down between C and D. Now, picture the barrack. It had tar paper. It had 1/4 inch by 1 1/4 inch slats to hold the tar paper down. And they had sheetrock separating each of the rooms. You say, well, that's not too bad. The ceiling was open across the whole barrack. If you were coughing in A, people could hear you in F. If you were ill, everybody heard you were ill. If you were coughing, everybody heard you coughing. Interesting thing is that there were over 400 babies that were born in the camp, so you figure that one out. So, in this picture right here is how the block looked. And in we had a mess hall. They they clanged a metal something. That we were there 3 meals a day. They had a latrine. I haven't used that word. How many people still use the word latrine? Really? That's interesting. Well, in the latrine, they had toilets lined up, one after the other, 5 or 6 in a row. On one side of the room, 5 or 6 in a row, on the other side of the room. They had all the toilet paper racks all lined up. No walls between the toilets. No doors for privacy. So you wonder, you picture yourself, and Dick's going to show you a picture later on what that really looked like. But you have to ask yourself, how much privacy do I need when I need to go? And some people say, I need a lot of privacy before I can go. Well, some people were going late at night because they could hold it. But then there are people who said, the hell with the privacy, I'm going to go. I don't care how much noise I make. I don't care what. I'm going to go. Okay. And then there's the showers. Shower heads were lined up one after another on both sides of the room. There were no walls between the showers. There's no doors to shield you from other people. So with all of that privacy gone, and the privacy in the barrack, and of course in the wintertime, just picture Utah now, okay? Utah gets pretty cold. So you say, okay, I have to go to the bathroom or latrine or restroom 2 in the morning. 3 inches of snow. 10 degrees Fahrenheit. You say, I don't want to go. I gotta go. So the ingenious people, what they did was they immediately got to the Sears and Roebuck catalog, and they ordered all these cooking pots that were this tall, about this big. And they were able to do it in their own room. And then they emptied it and cleaned it out on a daily basis. But you could see the inconvenience that was really created. So right now, the way things work is if you don't have a door to your bathroom, you're not going to buy that house, right? This is the way the barracks looked, very stark. This is what a typical room was like. Now, what I still don't understand is this picture right here. He's got his clock, fancy clock with him. He must have said, I need that clock. I don't care how much it weighs. I don't care how much space it takes. I'm going to take that clock with me. On the right, everybody gets a stove. How many of you use coal today? How many of you used coal before? So you're familiar with clinkers and ashes. Well, smart-ass me, I thought I was about 8 years old by then, and I thought, well, I'll take my turn at lighting the stove. So I loaded up the paper, kindling, and then the coal. Nobody told me that the adjustment down below determines how much oxygen is going to feed the fire. I had that stove red hot. I had the chimney, two pipes of the chimney were hot, and I'd have to say we were lucky I didn't burn the barrack down. How many of you washed with washboards in your historical past? Oh, there's a few. A man that raised his hand, that's good. We didn't have all the detergents that we have when you go down into a supermarket right now, all of the detergents are all lined up. All of the ways to clean your clothes, the way to clean the spots off and everything, it's all lined up. What we had in those days was a brown soap called Instant Fells Naphtha. How many of you remember that? Oh, very good. Am I tickling your memory at all? Some people had a lot of time on their hands, so then they made a garden. Now, you have to remember, there's no contractors coming in to do the cooking. There's no contractors do the dishwashing. My mother was a wait person, and so she served, when I went to breakfast in the morning, she served the milk or the coffee at lunch or dinner. So everything was voluntary. My dad was asked to make the coffee one day, and so he said, okay, I can make it. So he put the coffee urn in the hot water, and then he got the white powder and put it into the big container for coffee, and then he found out it was salt, and he was never asked to make coffee again. That's our family, and my dad's still not smiling, as you can see. I don't know where we got all his clothes. That's the gymnasium that was built. They played basketball. They played a lot of intramural basketball, as well as people from other cities came in to play basketball. Here's my third grade picture. To this day, I don't think the teacher that I had was accredited. We had fun in the camp, being as young as I was. Now, here's an interesting picture. We had Boy Scouts in the camp. We pledged allegiance in the morning before every class. We had flag ceremony before every football game. business as usual, football. Teachers were brought in from the outside of the camp, from Delta and surrounding cities. If you ever look at Delta on the map, when I say surrounding cities, there are not that many cities around the city, around Delta. Now, here's another interesting picture here. My brother graduated high school in the camp. This is his classmates. The woman on the second row, second from the right, that's his future bride. Cap and gowns, yearbooks. Is this business as usual or what? You know, you have to ask, hey, we're incarcerated, we're in a situation where we're behind barbed wires, we're guarded all the time. The surprise thing that happened after a year or so it happened, I'm going to read because the lettering is so small. This is a questionnaire that were given to all of the men in the camp that were of age. Are you willing to serve in the armed forces of the United States on combat duty wherever ordered? Will you swear unqualified allegiance to the United States of America and faithfully defend the United States from any and all attack by foreign or domestic forces, and forswear any form of allegiance or obedience to the Japanese emperor or any other foreign government, power, or organization? Now, are you a yes person or a no person? Yes, I'm loyal to the United States. No, I'm not. So picture yourself and you say, well, the Constitution says I'm an American citizen and I'll be protected. And then the Constitution is not protecting you. And so while you're behind barbed wire, you're being asked these questions. So you have to ask yourself, what would you do? And you can't go to Canada because Canada is out of the question right now. So this is where it gets a little tense, because if you say no, you're going to get shipped out to Tule Lake, where they were planning to ship all the people that were in Tule Lake to Japan. My father asked my brothers, do you want to go to Tule Lake or do you want to stay in Topaz? Do you want to go back? Do you want to go to Japan or not? So my brothers responded, hell no, I don't want to go. This is my country. So the people who said no went to Tule Lake. There are several that went. Some of them because of the principle within their system that says, I'm not being protected by the government. So what happened? A group of people volunteered to go in the service. A group of married men volunteered to go in the service. So you say, wow, that's really interesting. And so then they went into the 442nd and the 100th Battalion. Why were these Japanese guys put into organizations with Japanese people only? They didn't want to have friendly fire of these Japanese guys firing in the backs of the American GIs. That was the first thought that came up. That's why they kept them separated. So you had a lot of guys getting killed. You got a lot of guys that were wounded and missing in action. And then you had these gentlemen from Topaz. So the irony of this whole thing is, what the hell is going on? The results were that we had funerals inside the camp. The soldiers that came back with the deceased soldiers, the mothers, the Gold Star mothers, Gold Star fathers, The gentleman on the second row with the cap on, veteran of foreign wars, World War I. Okay, he figured that one out. My dad, when we left the camp, because we had two brothers in the service, he had 2 blue stars in the window. How many of you remember having windows with stars in the windows? There you go. These are people that are in their 80s. Now, by the time that they started taking the guys in the service, they're saying, well, why are we keeping people in the camp? Let's just do away with the camp. Easy to say, right? You just say, well, we'll just close it down, send everybody back. No way. So what they said was, okay, you're free to go. So you say, where do we go? We got kicked out of where we used to live. We got fired from the companies that we used to work for. I don't know if you know it or not, but the civil service workers that were working before the war started, after the war started, they were fired from their jobs. The men that were in the service were kicked out of the service and classified 4C, unfit for military service. So we get fired from the work. A lot of people got kicked out of their housing. A lot of people gave up their homes that they were living in. Could they go back? So you say, well, let's let the other people go first and then find out what it's like when they go back to where they used to live. So you say, oh, I'll leave in one day? No, I don't think so. So quota was set up. So if you didn't sign up for quota, you were told when you were going to leave. You would be packed up, you'd be escorted to the train and given about $20 plus the ticket. So resettlement. We happened to move back, we moved into Ogden, Utah because my dad had a connection with a jewelry store there. And you can see my brother in his uniform there. And this is a house that we used to live in Ogden, Utah. Family reunion. This is my 5th or 6th grade picture at Ogden, Utah, at Pingree Grade School. My dad won an award. So restitution. Through many years of legislative effort, Congress accepted what was done to the Japanese Americans was not right. An apology was written by George Bush. I like George Bush, sort of. A budget set up for several $1 million, and then $20,000 were awarded. This is the plaque that's in Delta. The follow-up to the 3 guys, the conviction overturned, Congress passed the Civil Liberties Act, Korematsu vacated conviction, and the lawyers will tell you what that means. Dick might go into it a little bit. So you say, what did I learn? Constitution was put aside, U.S. citizen excluded from protection, isolated behind barbed wire under military guard. Will it happen again? Vietnam War. I don't know if you realize this, but during the Vietnam War, they were ready to round up the protesters in Berkeley. Where were they going to take them? And the Middle East people. There's a camp near Livermore, California. They were ready to open up that camp again because it's already set up. Okay. Here's the 3 brothers in the service. My oldest brother was he used to read all the mail that was going into Japan and coming out of Japan. My brother was served in the Korean War. He was attached to the Marines. He went up to Yalu and with MacArthur and his debacle, my brother got captured by the North Koreans. He was captured for about 6 months, and luckily he came out. To this day, I believe that he had PTSD. Nobody knew what PTSD was in those days. I was lucky enough to serve in Korea for a year and put on a lot of weight. So, okay, incarceration versus relocation. Concentration camp versus concentration camp. I want to let you know that the concentration camp the death camps in Germany, all of the things that happened to all the Jewish people is nowhere near what happened to the Japanese people. But it did happen. It's all part of history. So when I talk about the concentration camps of Germany, I will use a capital C or an uppercase C. And for the camp, when we call it concentration camp in the States, I will use a lowercase c. That's my way of expressing myself as to how I differentiate, because there's no way ever that you can compare the two. Okay, we talked about Tantaran, Delta, Topaz, Tule Lake. That's my wife right there, my daughter, and my two sons. My daughter and Ray sitting up here, my son-in-law, they developed the slides, and I really want you to know how much I appreciate it, because they helped me to put my memory into. I was telling somebody up in the audience there that once you turn 80, things pop in. For some reason, they come out of nowhere, but they also pop out just as fast too. So if I didn't write all this down, I'd be in trouble. This is my rainbow-colored family, and this is our wedding, 56th wedding anniversary that happened 2.5 years ago. So anyway, it's been an interesting day. Today is a day of celebration for me because I'm on the green side. And I feel fortunate that at my age I can still recall a lot of things and express myself. And I appreciate all of you that you came today, and good health to all of you, and long life. Thank you very much.
I'd like to just pick up on what Yukio has been talking about by telling you what's being done in at least one of the former relocation centers to help us remember the past. And I think we can all agree, without wanting to get political or preachy, that we need to remember this particular past, and that's why we're all here. I came in contact with the relocation centers just about 16 years ago, a place called Manzanar. Topaz was one of 10 relocation centers, all in the western United States, defined as being west of the Mississippi River. And 2 of them are just barely west of the Mississippi River, on the banks, basically, of the Mississippi River in Arkansas. Most of the rest were really in what you and I would think of as the West. And one of those was the Manzanar War Relocation Center, which is located just east of the Sierra Nevada, between the towns of Lone Pine and Independence on Highway 395. It was the first assembly center, so it was Tantaran sooner or later became known as an assembly center. The idea was that people would be brought there and then moved on from the assembly center where they were assembled to the relocation center, where the theory was they were waiting to be relocated to other parts of the country. That relocation didn't work very well, although a number of people did leave the camps with permission to do so over the years. There were 17 assembly centers. There were 10 relocation centers, of which Topaz was one, Manzanar was another. This is what Manzanar War Relocation Center looked like in 1943. The picture was taken by a Japanese soldier out on leave, whose family was at Manzanar. And it's kind of a beautiful picture and looks like an attractive place. Tell yourself it would be attractive if you chose to be there. The big mountain in the background is Mount Williamson. Those of you who know the Sierra will remember Mount Williamson. It's quite a major landmark. The camp was on 1 square mile of land underneath Mount Williamson, and this was looking obviously to the west toward Mount Williamson. And you can see the general outlines of how the camp was put together. It's similar, but not exactly the same as the camp that Yukio told us about, in that there are rows, there are blocks. There were 36 residential blocks, every one of them set up the same way. Each of the 36 blocks was lined up exactly this way, with one exception, which is a trivia question when we're over there dealing with visitors to the site. The exception is one of the 36 blocks doesn't have a recreation building, but all the rest of them were just the same. So you see there would be 14 residential barracks. This is the Manzanar lineup, not necessarily the Topaz lineup. There was a mess hall in the upper right-hand corner, recreation building in the upper left corner, and then up the middle were 4 utility buildings and 1 utility oil drum. Manzanar used oil rather than coal to heat the barracks buildings. The utility buildings, so-called, included the men's latrine and the women's latrine. We'll circle back to that one very quickly here. Those latrines were the only toilet facilities available on the block. So if you need to do your devoir or to wash or to take a shower, you'd walk from your barracks over to the men's latrine or the women's latrine. And that was the way you did that. There was a laundry room, which was used for laundry. There was an ironing room, which was almost never used for ironing. It was used for a lot of other things. And the recreation building was used for churches on some blocks. Boy Scout meetings were held in the recreation building, and so on. But this was the outline of what it looked like on a block in Manzanar. Now, immediately after the war, that kind of bucolic-looking picture that you saw a moment ago of Manzanar was all taken away. All but 4 structures out of the some 500-odd structures that were on the site were removed. By the end of 1946, they were gone. The camp closed in November 1945. All the buildings were removed. So how are we going to remember the past if there just isn't any past there anymore? Starting in about 1969, people who'd been at Manzanar started to go back to Manzanar. I suspect, Yukio, you could tell us that something like that has happened at Topaz. I know it has in several other places. Tule Lake, for example, has a pretty active, I hate to call it an alumni association, but gatherings of people who were there. In 1969, a woman named Sue Kunitomi, who had married a Caucasian man named Embry, Sue Embry, led what they called a visit to the site, which is still being done today, and they're called pilgrimages, and we have them on the last Saturday of every April. We've got one coming up on April 29th for people to come back. There are very few survivors anymore, unfortunately. However, there are a number of people who philosophically are tuned into this, and we find a pretty good constituency of certainly Japanese Americans, Native Americans, African Americans, and quite recently a lot of Muslim Americans. Ellie and our son Bob and I have worked down there usually on pilgrimages, docents, answering questions and doing that sort of thing. And we had a very interesting conversation with a group of Muslim women who came in, young women, came into the barracks where we were working and sat down on the beds and said, "Tell us everything you know." And it turned out that what they wanted to do was have a conversation, and we had a conversation, and it was wonderful. A really interesting conversation. But these people, all of them, are interested in civil liberties and the rights of citizens and what went wrong in 1942 and how can we avoid having that go the same kind of wrong in 2017 or 2018. And they're good conversations, interesting conversations. That all began at Manzanar in 1969. Let's get together and remember the past. Over the years, as Yukio has told you, the Japanese Americans who'd been in the camps and those who were sympathetic toward them, and there were a lot of them and more, reality being what it is as the war receded in the rearview mirror, who supported the idea that the people who'd been in the camps were entitled to an apology and some money, and they got those, as Yukio has told you. Then in 1992, thanks to some rather effective lobbying by Japanese Americans who'd been in the Manzanar camp, and they lived for the most part in Los Angeles, the Congress designated Manzanar as a National Historic Site, which put it into the purview of the National Park Service. And it's run just like a national park. One of the questions we get at the desk, when I've worked at the desk in the past, has been, what's the entry fee? And we say, there's no charge, Yosemite pays for it. It's just a way of getting people to remember the past, and that's been the mission. Well, everything had been taken away, and a little bit came back. Let's see where we are in the process here. If the soldier, Taniguchi, had taken his picture of Manzanar in about 2 years ago, rather than back in 1943, this is about what it would look like. What's happened here, we're looking across Block 14, which is one of the 36 blocks, toward Mount Williamson. So the same orientation as the last picture. Those stately trees are gone. Most of the structures are gone. What are the structures that you see? Those are structures that the Park Service has rebuilt on the site to let people see what the barracks, for example, would have looked like. On Block 14, they've built 2 barracks, and in the diagram you saw a moment ago, let me go back to it. Yes, buildings 1 and 8 down at the bottom of the diagram, those are the ones that have been rebuilt. And they've also managed to bring back, they found at the Bishop Airport of all places, a mess hall that was built to the same specifications as the ones at Manzanar, talked the county out of it, brought it down, put it up on the site. So that gives you a few buildings to look at, and we've just added another one that I'll show you just in a moment here. This is a broader view of Manzanar as it is now. It was much more populated by buildings back in the day. The guard tower in the foreground was reconstructed with help of some private donations. The park has a very limited budget. And the white building that you see sort of in the middle of the picture is the auditorium that, as at Topaz, the people who were at Manzanar built themselves, used it for high school dances and high school graduation ceremonies, played basketball in there. It was a very nice building. Ironically, one of the first things that building was used for after it was built in the middle of the war was for a memorial service for a Japanese-American soldier who had been killed in Italy. The building remained. It was used by the county for a long time to repair county vehicles. It was kind of a mess by the time the Park Service took over. They've completely refurbished it, and it's a beautiful interpretive center now with a very good set of exhibits, highly recommended. It's about 8 hours from here, so it's a long drive, but boy, if you ever get a chance to get by Manzanar, it's a really good set of exhibits done by the Park Service. There's the mess hall. And to the left of the mess hall is a truck that the chief of interpretation at Manzanar found somewhere in an ad or something, and it appeared to be of the period, and she thought it would look wonderful to have that truck out there and paint it red. It looks very much like trucks that might have brought supplies to the camp back in the day, and it certainly does focus your attention. In the foreground, on the ground, and you can just barely see it in the slide, is the cement pad on which the women's latrine was built. Now, the women's latrine became a focus of the Park Service's attention for the fairly straightforward reason that it probably, as much as any other building at Manzanar, for the purpose of remembering the past, summoned up the degradation that was involved in being in the camp. And the Park Service is pretty good about vetting these ideas with survivors of the camps and their descendants. And they went to the Japanese-American community and did quite a bit of interviewing and talking about what should we do next on Block 14, and there was a great deal of support for the idea that what we should do is a replica of the women's latrine, because like nothing else, the idea of a woman from a very private and prideful culture being required to go and do her business on a toilet right next to another toilet where somebody else might be sitting, and to get there by walking across the sand in the summertime and across the mud in the wet parts of the wintertime to this kind of stark-looking building. Build one of those. It will give the message. It will help us remember the past. So they've done that. And there's the building. 2 months ago, 6 weeks ago is what it looked like. My son and I went down and we had a look, and sure enough, they'd finished building on that very cement slab a reconstruction that's as accurate as they could make it of what the women's latrine looked like. It looks prettier from the other side, Here you see the Inyo Mountains across the way. As I said, it's not a bad-looking place if you choose to be there. And the building to the right kind of looks almost like a Quonset hut, and it doesn't look dissimilar to the one that Yukio showed us a few minutes ago, is the auditorium as was built during the war, and it's now the interpretive center and the Park Service's offices for the building, and it works out very well. The building just to the left of the latrine, as you're looking here, is Building 1, the first barracks building, which is set up to show what the barracks looked like when you first arrived at Manzanar, as a person who'd been evacuated from the coast, packed onto trains or buses and taken up to Manzanar. That's what you'd walk into, with slits, as Yukio's described them, the cracks between the boards. When the boards dried, the wind and the sand would blow right through. No linoleum, partitions that came up only to about here and let every noise you might choose to make go the whole length of the barracks. All of that is represented in the way they've laid out Building 1. Building 8, on the other hand, shows how it looked after the detainees themselves had taken some steps to make their lives a little better, like putting down linoleum, like insisting on having wallboard to nail up and some insulation so they could keep the place a little bit warmer in the winter and a little cooler in the summer. And it really looks rather good. One of the most impressive things to me, coming in as an outsider, a non-Japanese person, and looking at these things, was how much ingenuity and effort was put in by the people who'd been put in this place to make it as livable as they could, and they did a pretty great job. All right, that's what the women's latrine looked like from the outside. From inside, it looked like that. Now this, you can see, is not set up for privacy. There's another row of 5 more commodes on the other side of that low barricade there. And then to the right of the camera is a long sheet metal trough that was the sink, and it was sloped from the west to the east down so that the leavings of brushing your teeth would go down the drain, which was at the low end of the trough. So if you were going to brush your teeth, it certainly behooved you to get to the west end of the trough. Then the shower room is sort of off to your left and behind you, and the shower room is completely stark. There's like 8 shower heads hanging from the wall, no partitioning at all. One of the interesting things, and Bob and I suggested that they should definitely incorporate this into their display down there, is that many of the women, seeing there was no provision for privacy when going to the toilet, started bringing large cardboard packing boxes, and there was a pretty good supply of those to be found, and fashioning their own booths with cardboard packing boxes. We suggest they put a cardboard packing box into that display so people can see what was done. After a while, management built some partitions around the toilets, but at the beginning and for probably the first year and a half, it looked like this, unless you had a cardboard packing box. Now there's one other current project going at Manzanar, and then I'll let it go to questions, and I think Yukio and I would both be delighted to stay as long as anyone would like to ask questions after we get done here. The early settlers, as it were, the people who were brought up from the Los Angeles area for the most part to Manzanar, were appalled to find that there was no provision at all for schools for their kids. The Army was running the place in the early days. Manzanar was initially an assembly center, and the assembly centers were run by the Army. The Army hadn't thought of that, at least at Manzanar. So they found no provision, no teachers, no classrooms, no supplies, no desks, no chairs. There's a very moving picture that I don't have in this slide display of several little boys on their knees with pencil and paper working on a bench, the kind of bench you'd sit on at a picnic table, trying to do their schoolwork on this bench because there wasn't anything else involved. The Japanese Americans who were in the camp took it upon themselves to find a way to have their kids continue their education. They'd been pulled out of school. The first people came up to Manzanar in March 21st of 1942. School was still going on. it was just disrupted. Everything in their lives was disrupted, and school was one of them. So they hustled around, found rooms, promoted equipment of various kinds, found teachers from among their own group, and muddled through. Fortunately, by June of 1942, the Army had moved out in terms of running the camp. They still had military police there to protect the people inside the barbed wire. And that's a whole nother story. But what they found they could do was they were shifted over to the jurisdiction of an organization called the War Relocation Authority, or WRA, which was in the Department of Agriculture. Interestingly, its first director at the time of this cutover in June of 1942 was a man named Milton Eisenhower, related by brotherhood to Dwight Eisenhower, the past president of the United States. Milton Eisenhower very soon left the job because he just couldn't handle it philosophically. He could not agree to the way people were being treated in the camps. But he was there and he had positive ideas, and one of the things that the WRA did was go right to bat on the subject of education. And with essentially the detainees and the WRA working together, Manzanar created a really good school system. By the time they were done, they had accredited teachers teaching in accreditable classrooms for high school and grade school, and kids were coming out of there with high school degrees that they could take downtown. And what Manzanar's Park Service people have decided to do is to tell that story in a mock-up classroom, a classroom that looks like the classroom would have looked toward the end of the war, and this is what that looked like. Pretty proud of the furniture. The tables and chairs were built in nearby Cupertino, California, by a bunch of elderly carpenter volunteers who did this as kind of a service project. And it came out pretty well, and the Park Service seems to be pleased. The price was right as far as the Park Service was concerned. In the original, they were painted white. Park Service says not white because that's hard to maintain. It'd be better to make it a natural finish. But otherwise, they're as close as we could get to the way those things were designed in the first place. The room has also, off the camera, an area to show what the provision for kindergarten students was, and it was kind of neat. It's a small area, scaled down, seating space and so forth. Looks really good. It's hard to tell in this photograph, but there's a sign hung up along the right-hand wall here, which says, "Welcome to Parents' Night." And that seemed like kind of a nice touch. And knowing the chief of interpretation at Manzanar, and I do know her, it's probably absolutely historically accurate. She works very slowly but does very accurate work. So that's kind of what's happening at Manzanar. Manzanar, as I say, is 8 hours from here by car, and there's no other really good way to get there. 7 hours if you go in the summertime over Tioga Pass and kind of flog the mule along the way. Surprisingly, there's pretty good accommodations over there, pretty good restaurants, Lone Pine, and some pretty good arrangements in Independence as well. It's on the way to Death Valley. Hey, for that, as far as that goes, it's on the way to Las Vegas too. So pick your poison, and when you're on the way, please do stop by Manzanar and have a look. I think you'll find it worthwhile, and particularly if you take the 22 minutes to watch their introductory film called Remembering Manzanar. If you're like most of the visitors we talk into going into the film, you'll come out of there with tears rolling down your cheeks, because it's amazingly effective and tells the story much more eloquently than I could. Thank you, and we will... And we will be available. So come up and grab us if you have a question.
Okay, well, we'll take a couple of questions here. Was there a hospital?
I'll answer for Manzanar. Manzanar had a very well-equipped hospital, had good medical staff from the outset. At a point in time, I think around the beginning of 1943, the Japanese-American doctors who'd been staffing the hospital were phased out and Caucasian doctors were put in. At least in the management positions, but there was a very good, big hospital there that worked very well.
In Topaz, there were doctors, Japanese doctors, and they were getting paid about $20 to $25 a month. So, you know, what I'd have to say, it's just business as usual. So I had a barber cut my hair, and but in those days she didn't have electric clippers. She had a hand. I don't know if you've ever seen those hand clippers. When they come in and they don't do this, it really grabs your hair and it hurts.
Okay. All right, well, we'll take one more, and then the fellow with the tie-dye shirt there.
Comment a little bit about what the morale was like of living there.
A comment about the morale?
You're asking, were they okay? And the answer is, it was really tough. It was the word "gaman" is the word that really comes back. And in those days, depression was not diagnosed as much as it is today, but there were people that were depressed. They were immobile, and they just didn't know what the hell was going on. And the people who were, especially past their 60s and 70s, they stayed in a stunned state. The younger people had more resilience. And I was lucky to be a kid while I was in the camp, but I still feel the feelings that my mom and dad went through.
There are refreshments in the back for those of you that have developed an appetite during the course of this, so please help yourself. Thanks so much.